I never believed a single knock could unearth my deepest scars. The rain pounded my windows like 1,000 restless hearts, yet that soft rap at midnight froze me in place. When I cracked open the door, I found a shivering stranger whose haunted eyes seemed to know every secret I'd buried. In that heartbeat, my warm kitchen became the crossroads of mercy and a destiny I couldn't ignore. The cafe clock blinked 11:58 p.m., its green digits dragging through the storm. I had just finished wiping down the last table when a hesitant knock rattled the back door. My chest tightened. Who would be out in weather like this, unless driven by desperation? I gripped the wooden spoon still in my hand, steam rising from the pot of soup on the stove, and hesitated. Part of me urged caution. Leave the door locked. Keep the storm and stranger outside. But another part, one forged in the memory of nights spent cold and hungry, whispered that I couldn't turn him away. I drew in a shaky breath, pushed aside the curtain, and opened the door a crack. Rain lashed against my face, and there he was, a man in his 70s, shoulders stooped beneath a coat too thin for the weather. His boots were soaked, his trousers clung to his legs, and a tattered blanket hung under one arm. He said nothing, but his pale blue eyes locked with mine, heavy with sorrow and something unspoken. In that gaze, I felt both fear and recognition. "Come in," I whispered, stepping aside. I closed the door quickly, jamming a chair against the handle before the storm could return. He sagged into the stool by the counter as I draped a dry blanket over his trembling shoulders. Without a word, I filled 2 bowls with the steaming soup and slid one toward him. He lifted it with both hands, bowing his head as though receiving a sacred gift, and took a slow, reverent sip. Watching him, something inside me cracked. "Are you hungry?" I asked softly. "It's just soup, but it's warm." He looked up, eyes glistening with gratitude, and managed a faint smile. His silence was almost heavier than words, yet when he finally spoke, his voice was as fragile as moth wings. "Thank you." That simple phrase jolted me. I blinked hard, swallowing the lump in my throat. To fill the silence, I told him of my own past, how once, years ago, I had been the one stranded on a cold doorstep, saved only because someone had offered me warmth. His gaze sharpened, listening as if every word mattered. "Compassion," he murmured, "finds you even in the darkest hours." His tone carried an echo that pierced me, stirring memories I'd tried to bury. My mother's failing breath, the loneliness of hospital nights, the helplessness of a child, too small to change anything. The storm raged, thunder shuddering against the windows. The lantern light caught his silver hair as he removed his cap, revealing a face worn with time, yet dignified in a way that unsettled me. Slowly, he reached into his coat. My pulse raced as he placed a folded piece of fine stationery on the counter between us. The embossed crest on the letter made my heart stutter. I had seen it once on a faded poster, the Hartley Foundation. Beneath the crest, in careful navy ink, was a name, Edward Hartley, CEO. I stared, nearly dropping the paper. This man, hunched before me in rags, was the head of a billion-dollar empire. His eyes held mine with quiet intensity. "I was once the child who received kindness," he said softly. "I never forgot. Tonight I came to repay." The cafe seemed to still. The storm outside hushed to silence. My hands shook as his words sank in. He pressed his hand over mine, warm despite the damp coat. "Meet me at Hartley Bridge at midnight," he said with unexpected firmness. Before I could protest, he rose, gathered his blanket, and slipped out into the storm. The door shut behind him, leaving me breathless in the flickering lantern glow. I clutched the note to my chest, the ink imprinting itself like a brand on my soul. Outside, lightning split the sky, and I realized this was no chance meeting. It was an invitation into a world I never dreamed I would enter. He lifts his tattered cap, and beneath silver hair shines like moonlight. His hand trembles as he reaches into his coat. My heart pounds. What secret does he carry? Lightning flashes, and I brace for the truth he will finally reveal. Each spoonful echoed in the hushed kitchen like a question unanswered. He ate in near total silence, eyes locked on mine with deep intensity. His gaze cut deeper than any blade, shaping my doubts into a razor's edge. Something about him felt painfully familiar, yet his story remained hidden in the steam. The storm had quieted into steady rain, tapping against the window as though keeping time with our breaths. I set the second bowl of tomato basil stew before him, the ceramic clinking softly on the steel counter. He nodded once in gratitude and raised the spoon to his lips. His eyes fluttered shut as he tasted, and for a moment I watched him, entranced. Each motion was deliberate, controlled, as if eating was not an act of survival, but of reverence. I cradled my own bowl, spoon poised but untouched. The silence pressed between us like a third presence, heavy, yet strangely soothing. I longed to ask questions, to understand why fate had led this man into my kitchen, but feared that a single word might break the fragile thread holding him here. Finally, unable to bear it, I whispered, "I'm May Turner. This bistro, it's named after my grandmother. She taught me that cooking is more than food, it's a way of remembering." He opened his eyes, pale blue and unblinking, as though measuring the weight of my confession. Then, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, he said, "Your grandmother was kind." He lifted the steaming mug of water I had given him and raised it slightly, as if in salute. My chest tightened. She believed a meal could heal anything, even a broken heart. The words tasted raw on my tongue. For a moment I thought he might smile, but instead his gaze grew distant, like he was chasing a memory across years. "You saved me," he murmured suddenly, the words cutting through the hush like glass. I froze. "Not just tonight," my voice quivered. "What do you mean?" He set his spoon aside and folded his hands, leaning forward. His voice trembled but carried a strange strength. "I once had everything: wealth, power, respect. But I lost it all when I forgot how to care. Tonight reminded me that compassion is not a myth, that kindness still exists." His confession pierced me in ways I could not explain. I had expected gratitude, not revelation. I searched his face, the lines etched deep into his skin, the sorrow carved into his gaze. It was not the look of a man ruined by poverty, but one burdened by ghosts of his own making. Before I could reply, a sharp crash jolted me. I turned toward the alley window where a wooden crate had slammed against the glass, hurled by the wind. The storm clawed at the edges of the night, but when I glanced back, his eyes were steady, unfazed. "I've faced worse storms," he said, almost with a touch of irony. The faintest smile tugged at my lips. I poured more hot water into his mug and urged, "You should rest. I have a couch upstairs, blankets, dry sheets." He shook his head gently. "Tomorrow may require more of me than tonight. For now." This is enough, I wanted to insist, but something in his tone silenced me. I cleared the counter instead, rinsing the bowls, trying to calm the storm inside me. Each clink of porcelain sounded louder than it should, and when I turned back, he had folded the blanket neatly over my grandmother's chair. He rose with slow dignity, gripping the counter for balance. "I should go," he said, voice cracking. "I don't wish to overstay." "You're not overstaying," I blurted. "You're welcome here any time." His eyes softened, though sadness lingered there. "I'll remember that." Then, with a hesitation that spoke louder than words, he pressed something into my palm. My breath caught as I looked down. A faded photograph, edges frayed, showing two children on a snowy curb. One offered a sandwich to the other. My throat constricted. I knew this photo. It had been mine once, a keepsake from a fleeting act of childhood kindness, until it vanished years ago. How do you have this?" I stammered. His lips curved into a sorrowful smile. "I carried it all these years. I needed to know someone remembered tears blurred my vision. This man, the quiet stranger before me, had once been the boy I'd given that sandwich to, long before I understood what compassion truly meant. Now, after decades, he had carried the proof back into my hands. He tucked the blanket under his arm and pulled his cap low. Good night, May. Until tomorrow. Zakuzyish, they were swung open, letting in a rush of cold rain before closing softly behind him. I stood rooted to the floor, the photograph trembling between my fingers, my heart pounding with revelation. Outside, the storm pressed against the glass, but inside, I felt only the weight of a bond rekindled across time. The stool where he had sat was empty now, but I could still feel the echo of his presence, like warmth lingering after a fire has burned low. Compassion had bridged decades and delivered him back to me, though why, and to what end, I could not yet know. At last, he places a gentle hand on mine, voice low. You've changed more lives than you know. His grip is both warm and weighty. The lantern flickers, and in its glow, I glimpse a flash of something I can't yet name. My breath catches as he teeters on the brink of revelation. Outside, the storm's fury mirrors the whirlwind of truth about to burst upon my world. My mornings once began with onion peels and unpaid bills. I scraped by on hopes and second helpings, dreaming of more. Tonight's visitor has awakened memories I thought long buried. Every taste, every aroma in this kitchen now sings with ghosts of my past. The cafe had grown quiet again, yet his presence lingered like a ghost at my shoulder. As I sat in the glow of the lantern, the steam from the soup carried me backward, into rooms I hadn't dared revisit for years. The sound of dripping water from the faucet seemed to echo with a rhythm that belonged not to the present, but to the kitchens of my childhood. I was a little girl again, perched on a stool in a cramped apartment painted yellow and peeling at the edges. My parents worked tirelessly to keep food on the table. My father's soup simmered with onion and garlic. My mother's hands kneaded dough with flour dusting her hair like snow. Even when bills stacked higher than the bread, laughter filled the air. We shared one bowl between many mouths, yet each spoonful felt abundant. Scarcity taught me hunger, but it also taught me that love could season even the simplest dish. The memory shifted. I was older now, living in a single-room attic apartment. A chipped mug of instant oats sat on the counter as I scribbled recipes by candlelight. Outside, the city roared. Horns, sirens, footsteps on wet pavement. But inside, I clung to scraps of hope. I spread my grandmother's recipe cards across the floor, tracing her faded handwriting with trembling fingers. Cook with love, one note said. The world will taste it. I whispered those words like a prayer. Years later, the dream took form when I signed the lease for this very bistro. The landlord handed me a tarnished key, and I unlocked possibility with shaking hands. The place was shabby. Mismatched chairs, a dented stove, walls in desperate need of paint. But I painted them a gentle blue, hung photos of my parents, and opened my doors with nothing more than courage. On the first night, a single family friend stopped by, tasted my soup, and left a generous tip. I cried in the kitchen afterward, not because of the money, but because someone believed. But belief was fragile. Nights were long, cleaning tables until my back ached, scrubbing pots until my hands blistered. I would lean against the doorway, watching the streetlights flicker against empty cobblestones, wondering if sacrifice was worth it. Some nights I doubted, but then I'd remember the nurse who whispered thanks after a long shift, or the young artist who left me a sketch of my menu as payment. Each encounter reminded me that food was not only sustenance, it was connection, memory, and comfort wrapped into a single bowl. These thoughts washed over me as I sat across from the stranger. His pale eyes seemed to drink in my words as I confessed aloud the journey that had brought me here. He listened intently, as if my past was not only mine, but his to carry. The rain softened outside, as though giving space for the silence between us to breathe. You cook with your soul, he said finally. his voice quiet but sure. I can see it. I once had that spark, too, the kind that makes you believe food can change more than hunger. His insight startled me. How could this man, cloaked in rags, see so deeply into me? My heart thudded as I lowered my gaze, tracing my finger along the photograph of my parents that lay near the counter. He leaned forward and placed a hand gently over mine. The warmth of his touch startled me. "Stories anchor us," he said. "Without them, we drift." The photograph blurred through my tears. I thought of my father's soup, my mother's bread, the attic room, the first customer. Each memory formed a thread, weaving together to explain why this bistro, and every bowl of soup I served, mattered more than money or success. I met his gaze again, and for the first time I felt a strange recognition, as though our lives were tied by some invisible knot neither of us could cut. His eyes glistened with both grief and pride, as though he had lived echoes of the same story. Before I could ask the question trembling on my lips, he reached into his coat and withdrew something small, but gleaming. Slowly, he laid it on the counter, a polished silver cufflink, etched with a crest I recognized instantly. The lantern light caught its surface, scattering brightness across the walls. My breath stuttered. This was no ordinary accessory. It bore the mark of legacy, of wealth, of secrets carefully hidden. He watched me closely as I stared at it, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Do you understand what this means?" he whispered, his voice weighted with both sorrow and destiny. As I wipe a tear from my apron, he rises slowly and reveals a polished silver cufflink. Its intricate crest gleams in the lantern's glow, carving a path of truth through the shadows. My pulse stutters as I realize this is no ordinary patron. His identity ties to every memory I've recounted. He steps forward, voice hushed. "Do you understand what this means?" Outside, thunder rumbles once more, and I brace for the revelation that will change everything. I nearly dropped my ladle when I saw it, a monogrammed cufflink on his sleeve. Silk and silver replaced his tattered coat, glinting with impossible wealth. The kitchen's warmth turned to ice in an instant. In that breath, I realized nothing about tonight would be the same. The storm outside rattled the cafe windows, yet inside time seemed suspended. I gripped the ladle, heart racing, as his trembling hand revealed the object glimmering under the lantern's light. A silver cufflink, perfectly polished, etched with a lion's head crest and entwined initials. Not the trinket of a wanderer, but the emblem of a man bound to wealth and legacy. My breath caught. "Where did you get this?" He met my eyes, expression steady, yet shadowed. "It belonged to someone I used to be." His voice was low, almost weary, as though each word peeled away layers of disguise. I brushed my fingers over the crest, recognizing its design. It was the same symbol stamped on the stationery he had given me earlier, the Hartley Foundation. The man I thought destitute was cloaked in a truth I could scarcely believe. I searched his face, caught between disbelief and awe. His coat, threadbare just hours before, now seemed to conceal the fine silk lining of a tailored garment. His boots, glistening under the light, bore the sheen of polish. It was as though he had carried both poverty and power on his back, shifting between the two at will. "You're not who you seemed," I whispered. He gave a small, almost sorrowful smile, and slipped the cufflink back into his pocket. "Appearances mislead, May. Sometimes we need to remember where we came from." I wanted to press him further, but before I could, he drew another item from his coat. This time, an envelope. Heavy cream vellum, its wax seal stamped with the same crest. He slid it across the counter toward me. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was an invitation written in elegant calligraphy. "You are cordially invited to Ashton Manor. Formal attire requested." The words gleamed like a door opening into another world. The image of a grand hall swam in my mind. Chandeliers, polished marble, tables laden with silver and glass. a place so far removed from my cafe that it felt like fantasy. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why not invite someone from your world?" He leaned closer, his gaze unwavering. "Because tonight you gave me more than food. You gave me hope, and only someone who understands hunger and compassion can enter the life I want to build." The sincerity in his tone unsettled me. This was no test, no trick. He was offering me entry into his circle, into a place where I would never belong on my own, but where he believed I deserved to stand. Still, doubt clung to me. I glanced at the clock. It was just after 6, hours until the time written on the card. My throat tightened. "I don't have the clothes." I wouldn't know how to act. He straightened, retrieving a sleek velvet garment bag from beside his stool. "I thought you might say that." I unzipped it with trembling fingers. Inside lay a gown of midnight blue, simple yet elegant, its fabric catching the light like starlight on water. Beneath it, a pair of suede heels and a pearl necklace rested carefully folded. The sight brought tears to my eyes. "I can't accept this," I said, voice shaking. "You already have," he replied gently. "You accepted the moment you opened your door to me." I pressed the dress against my chest, overwhelmed by the weight of trust he was placing in me. This wasn't just about a dinner. It was an invitation into a destiny larger than my bistro, larger than the life I had built with scraped coins and stubborn hope. I thought of my grandmother's words, that love cooked into food would carry further than money. Could this be what she meant? That compassion might carry me to places I never imagined? The kettle whistled softly behind me, grounding me in the smallness of my cafe. Yet when I looked back at him, I saw not the shivering old man who had appeared at my door, but a figure of quiet power, his silver hair gleaming like a crown in the lantern glow. He rose, adjusting his coat, as though preparing to step once more into the storm. But before he left, he laid a hand on my shoulder, steady and sure. "This invitation," he said, "changes everything. Not just for you. For both of us." I swallowed hard, staring down at the card in my hands. The crest shone under the light, as though daring me to follow where it would lead. He presses the invitation across the table. "This changes everything." My breath catches as I read elegant script and a bold seal. Outside, the storm howls, yet I feel irresistibly drawn toward the unknown. Will I accept the life he's offering, stepping into silk and secrets, or retreat to the familiar safety of my small, lamplit kitchen? He cleared his throat, voice trembling with both pride and guilt. "I am the CEO of Ashton International, a billion-dollar empire." My world spun as the words echoed off every wall. The cafe felt suddenly too small for the truth he had spoken. The storm battered the windows, but its fury was nothing compared to the tempest inside me. He sat across the counter, the same man who had shivered in my doorway, yet no longer a stranger. His presence carried the weight of skyscrapers and boardrooms, of lives moved by numbers on screens. I gripped the counter to steady myself. What did you just say?" His hands folded, his silver hair glowing under the lantern. "I built Ashton International from a garage with nothing but a desk and a broken computer. I sold my first software door to door until someone finally gave me a chance. That one contract became the seed of an empire I tried to picture him, young, ambitious, knocking on office doors with a dream in hand. The image unsettled me. This man, now cloaked in sorrow and humility, had once been a titan. His voice grew stronger as he continued. "We grew into data centers, thousands of employees, millions in revenue. But I wanted more than profit, so I created the Ashton Foundation, funding schools, clinics, food programs across the globe." His eyes dimmed. Yet somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what mattered. I became a figurehead, a name on letterheads, a photograph at galas. I forgot what it meant to share a meal with someone in need. At his words, something shifted in me. My parents' clinic had once been saved by an Ashton Foundation grant. Medicine, equipment, hope delivered in boxes stamped with his crest. I remembered how grateful my mother had been and how faceless the generosity had seemed. Until now. His voice broke as he looked down at the chipped bowl on the counter. Tonight, I didn't come here as a CEO. I came as a man desperate to remember what it feels like to be seen as human. The admission struck me harder than his revelation of wealth. I thought of my own struggles, late nights, unpaid bills, the weight of survival pressing on my chest. Though our worlds were oceans apart, loneliness had carved the same hollow inside us both. Then he pulled a second envelope from his coat. This one was embossed with gold, the Ashton crest shimmering in the light. He slid it across the counter, his hand steady. I want you at my table tomorrow night. Ashton Tower, a formal dinner. I want you to help me build something greater than profit. I picked up the envelope with trembling hands. My reflection shimmered in the golden seal. Why me? I whispered. Why not one of your executives? Why a cook who barely pays her rent? His gaze locked with mine, unwavering. Because you cook with heart. You reminded me tonight of what I've lost, and I need that truth to guide me. I want you to lead a new initiative, community kitchens under the Ashton banner, places that offer dignity as much as meals, not for charity alone, but for legacy. My pulse hammered. Community kitchens backed by $1 billion empire? My tiny bistro seemed to shrink under the enormity of the vision. Fear and wonder wrestled inside me. Could I shoulder such responsibility? Could my recipes, born from poverty and love, shape something so vast? I lowered my gaze to the bowl between us, the steam still curling upward. It wasn't glamorous or costly. It was simple soup. Yet it had changed the course of this night, and perhaps of both our lives. He placed his hand gently over mine, the cufflink on his wrist catching the light. Terrified? He asked softly. I nodded. Terrified. Good, he said with a faint smile. It means you care. His words sank deep, steadying me even as my doubts howled. For years I had dreamed of impact, of proving that food was more than sustenance. It was healing, connection, community. Now the chance stood before me, cloaked in silver hair and billion-dollar confessions. Outside, the storm roared, but inside, the cafe glowed with something far stronger than fear, possibility. He folds his hands, eyes brimming. I need you to lead a project I care about. My pulse hammers. This is no casual favor. The kettle whistles, shattering the moment's intensity. Will I follow him into the lion's den, or leave the kettle to burn? Tomorrow, the doors of Ashton Tower, and my future, stand wide open. Morning light poured through my windows, every ray a question. Could I leave my humble bistro for boardrooms and billionaires? My heart leaned toward both fear and possibility. The alarm on my phone buzzed before sunrise, its soft tone slicing through restless dreams. I lay still beneath tangled sheets, staring at the pale light creeping through the curtains. The envelope rested on my bedside table, its golden seal gleaming like a command. Every breath I took seemed to tighten the knot in my chest. Last night's revelation had cracked open a future I wasn't sure I was ready to claim. Sleep had barely touched me. I drifted between fractured dreams, corporate halls lined with glass and mirrors, chandeliers casting harsh light on my clumsy steps, the weight of executives' stares pressing like judgment. Then the scene would shift. I'd be back in my grandmother's kitchen, flour dusting the air, her voice reminding me that food made with love could heal anything. Both dreams clung to me as I sat up, rubbing my eyes, torn between the life I had built and the one now being offered. I made coffee slowly, grounding beans with trembling hands. The dark aroma filled the room, steadying my racing thoughts. Cradling the warm mug, I let the steam curl around me like an anchor. Yet even this ritual, usually my comfort, couldn't quiet the question echoing inside me. Was I ready to step out of the safe rhythm of my bistro into a world where mistakes could ruin more than myself? I opened the envelope again. The script was as elegant as the seal. May Turner, join me at Ashton Tower tonight at 6 p.m. The future of compassion depends on it. My breath caught on the words. Not the future of food, not the future of profit, the future of compassion. Could I really believe that a billion-dollar empire could center itself around kindness? To clear my head, I wrapped myself in a coat and stepped into the morning market. Vendors were already arranging their stalls, their laughter weaving into the dawn. Mrs. Ortega waved me over, pressing tomatoes into my hands. "Big day ahead?" she asked knowingly. I managed a weak smile. The biggest. Further down, Ben the baker handed me a croissant, still warm from the oven. "Don't let fancy people scare you," he said with a wink. "If they can't see your worth, that's their loss." Their encouragement grounded me. These were my people, the ones who knew my struggle, who tasted the love in every bowl I served. Whatever choice I made tonight, I carried them with me. Back at my apartment, my phone buzzed with a new message. "Looking forward to tonight. H." My fingers hovered before typing a reply. "I accept. Thank you for the trust. See you at 6. When I pressed send, my pulse skipped. It was done. I had stepped past the point of no return. I laid the velvet garment bag across the bed and unzipped it slowly. The midnight blue gown shimmered faintly in the sunlight, a garment far removed from my flour-stained aprons. I slipped it on, smoothing the fabric over my hips. The suede heels pinched slightly, unfamiliar but steady. Last, I clasped the pearl necklace at my throat. When I turned to the mirror, I barely recognized myself, yet the eyes staring back were still mine, wide with fear, but also with fire. My phone buzzed again. Another message from him. "I'll send a car at 5:30. Prepare for a night that begins with supper and ends with transformation." My breath caught. Transformation. The word both thrilled and terrified me. I thought of the cafe sign swinging gently outside my window, of the nurses and artists and neighbors who had found comfort there. Their stories gave me strength. I pressed my palm over my heart and heard my grandmother's voice whisper, "May, the world needs your recipes, but more than that, it needs your heart." I slipped the invitation into the pocket of my gown, picked up my purse, and stepped outside. The morning sun broke fully across the rooftops, washing the city in light. For the first time, I felt the weight of my decision settle not as fear, but as possibility. Tonight, I would walk into Ashton Tower not as a guest, but as someone carrying the fire of compassion into its halls. My message goes through. A reply pings, "Meet me at 6 p.m., Ashton Tower, top floor." I spot my reflection in the cafe window, eyes alight with both dread and wonder. The velvet gown sways as I step into the car, waiting outside. Tonight, I step beyond everything I've ever known. The elevator's mirrored walls closed around me with a soft hum. Each floor lit up as we climbed, symbols of power and wealth. By the top, I felt both small and ready to conquer my fears. The car Henry had sent glided through the city like a phantom, its windows tinted against curious eyes. By the time it stopped before Ashton Tower, dusk had draped the skyline in velvet. I stepped out, my gown whispering against the pavement, and craned my neck toward the steel and glass monolith that seemed to pierce the clouds. Its lights shimmered like constellations, daring me to step into their orbit. Inside, the lobby stretched before me, vast and gleaming. Marble floors veined with gold reflected the chandeliers above, while walls of glass displayed cascading fountains. My footsteps echoed as though the building itself was listening. Uniformed attendants bowed, one of them scanning my invitation with a discreet device before nodding. "Welcome, Miss Turner. Your host awaits." The words made my chest tighten. I crossed the expanse toward the waiting elevator, my heels clicking like the rhythm of a drumbeat. The doors slid shut, sealing me into a chamber of mirrors. I stared at my reflection, gown flawless, necklace glowing softly at my throat, but eyes wide with trepidation. Each passing floor lit the panel. 12, 25, 40. Each one lifting me higher, away from the streets that had once defined me, closer to a world where I feared I might not belong. When the doors opened, I stepped into a corridor lit by warm, recessed lights. A pair of guards moved beside me, their composure precise, almost ceremonial. They checked my necklace, scanned discreetly for devices, then gestured me forward with respectful nods. At the end of the hall, a set of silver-grained doors parted soundlessly. Henry stood waiting. He was transformed. Tuxedo pressed to perfection, silver hair swept back, a presence at once regal and familiar. His cufflink gleamed with the crest I now recognized instantly. Yet when he extended his hand, his eyes softened, steadying me. "May," he said warmly. "Welcome." His grip was firm, grounding, pulling me back from the brink of nerves. "It's beautiful," I whispered, glancing around the foyer with its walnut panels and copper inlays. He chuckled softly. "A little different from soup pots and aprons, isn't it? Come, let me show you more." The doors opened into a penthouse that stole my breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the space, unveiling the city sprawled in 1,000 glittering lights. Furniture of glass and marble gleamed, softened by orchids placed at intervals, their fragrance mingling with the faint hum of the city below. I walked to the glass and pressed my fingertips against the cool surface, staring at streets I knew so well from this impossible height. "This is where I find perspective," Henry said quietly at my side. "It reminds me that the empire we build must serve those who walk beneath these lights, not just those who look down from above." His words caught me off guard. For all the wealth surrounding us, he spoke with the weight of someone seeking redemption, not luxury. He led me further inside, into a kitchen that seemed plucked from a chef's dream. Counters of polished quartz gleamed beneath hidden lights. A carousel fridge rotated silently, revealing herbs fresher than any I had ever seen. A sous vide hummed quietly. Knives rested magnetized in perfect alignment, and even a robotic arm stirred a pot with mechanical grace. "This," Henry said, spreading his arms, "was designed to be a place of creation, not just display. A chef's sanctuary. Yours, if you'll accept it." I trailed my hand over the counter, my reflection rippling on its polished surface. It was everything my tiny cafe kitchen could never be. Yet it felt strangely hollow, compared to the warmth of chipped bowls and crowded tables. I turned to him, my voice unsteady. "Why me, Henry? Why bring me here?" His smile was gentle, almost wistful. "Because you reminded me that power without compassion is nothing. Tonight isn't just about boardrooms or towers. It's about merging two worlds, your heart and my resources. Together we can feed more than hunger. We can nourish hope." The words settled in me like a stone dropped into water, rippling outward. I thought of the stormy night when I had first opened the door to him, of the photo he had carried, of the soup that bridged decades of silence. Could it really lead here, to this penthouse of glass and steel? Henry reached behind him and produced a folded white jacket, the fabric crisp and embroidered with my name, Chef Turner. He held it out with both hands, reverent as though offering a crown. "Welcome home," he said softly. I slipped my arms into the sleeves, my fingers trembling as I traced the stitching of my name. The jacket settled around me like a mantle, heavier with responsibility than fabric alone could explain. I met his gaze, and saw not just a CEO, but a man entrusting me with something he could no longer carry alone. He hands me a chef's jacket, embroidered with my name, fabric whispering promise. Soft light glints on a framed photo of my bistro on the wall behind him, a bridge between past and present. He smiles. "Welcome home, in more ways than one." I slip on the jacket, fingers trembling over the embroidery, heart racing with hope. Beyond these polished floors lies a world waiting for my recipes and my courage. Beneath crystal chandeliers, I chopped vegetables for 50 executives. Boardroom tables gleamed as I presented my humble recipes. Their curious eyes turned into respect, one bite at a time. The dining hall stretched endlessly, polished mahogany glowing under silver chandeliers. 50 chairs encircled the table, each place setting marked by crystal and porcelain. It wasn't just a dinner, it was a council of judgment. The men and women who filed in wore suits worth more than my cafe's monthly rent, their watches flashing under the lights. They spoke in hushed tones, voices carrying the confidence of wealth and authority. I stood at the head of the table in my new chef's jacket, heart hammering against my ribs. For years, my audience had been weary nurses, struggling mothers, the lonely and forgotten. Tonight, it was CEOs, investors, and board members, people who shaped the city with signatures and votes. And all I had to offer them was food from my heart. Henry entered last, commanding the room without needing to raise his voice. He gestured to me with quiet pride, then took his seat at the center. I swallowed hard, lifted my chin, and began. Tonight's menu, I announced, is not just about taste. It's about memory, about community, about how a single meal can change a life. My voice echoed through the hushed hall. Servers brought the first course, ribbons of roasted zucchini and golden beets tossed in lemon rosemary vinaigrette. The colors glowed beneath the chandelier's brilliance. Forks moved hesitantly, then with growing interest. Eyes that had been skeptical softened as the flavors met their tongues. A murmur spread across the table, delight, surprise, even nostalgia. I took a deep breath and unveiled the second course. Sunday stew for solace. Slow-braised beef and root vegetables, the broth rich with saffron cream. This dish, I explained, comes from my grandmother's kitchen. It fed us when nothing else could. For a long moment, silence reigned as they tasted. Then came the nods, the softened expressions, the sighs of unexpected comfort. In that instant, the gap between my world and theirs narrowed. They weren't titans of industry. They were simply people who remembered the warmth of a meal shared in love. But not all were convinced. A man at the far end of the table set down his spoon with a sharp clink. His tailored suit was pristine, his eyes calculating. "Delicious, yes," he said coolly, "but impractical. How do you justify this on scale? Premium ingredients, long preparation time. Where's the profit margin?" A hush fell. Every gaze swung toward me. My palms dampened, but I forced my voice steady. "I understand your concern. But food is not just cost, it's investment. When we served stew at a $5 pop-up in Eastwood, funded by community donations, the returns weren't just money. They were loyalty, media coverage, trust. That $5 brought people together, and their support brought more." I gestured toward Henry, who nodded for a screen to be lowered. Graphs flickered into view, charts showing increased brand loyalty, press coverage, measurable social impact. "When you invest in dignity," I said firmly, "profit follows. Not just financial profit, but social capital, lasting relationships, community resilience. That is what sustains a brand far longer than spreadsheets." The room shifted. Where there had been skepticism, now there was thoughtfulness. The investor leaned back, lips pursed, not yet convinced, but no longer dismissive. I exhaled slowly, pulse pounding. The final course arrived, small fruit tartlets glistening with berries from local farmers. I handed one to each guest, my voice softer now. "This dessert carries a story, too. The cherries were grown by a baker who nearly lost her shop. A microgrant helped her reopen. Today, she employs apprentices, pays fair wages, and supplies markets across the city. Every bite you taste carries her triumph." Forks lifted, bites were taken, and the room seemed to breathe as one. Some closed their eyes. Others exchanged quiet words. One woman, a dignified philanthropist, dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin. Henry rose, raising his glass high. His voice carried both command and warmth. To May Turner, for proving that a meal can be both nourishment and revolution. Applause rippled down the long table, growing louder until it filled the hall. My knees felt weak, but my spirit soared. I had not just served food. I had planted seeds of change in the very heart of power. Then, as the applause faded, the screen flickered again. A new slide appeared in bold letters. Proposal approval by midnight. The words hit me like a cold wind. Everything I had poured out tonight, every story, every dish, would be decided by a vote. By midnight, my future would either ignite or crumble. The CEO raises his glass. To a partnership of vision and heart. Polite applause ripples through the room. A final slide appears on the presentation screen. Proposal approval by midnight. The projector hums ominously as I realize the stakes have never been higher. Tonight, my recipes could reshape an empire, or vanish under the weight of corporate demands. Numbers soared on spreadsheets, but so did doubts in the boardroom. The next 24 hours would test every ingredient of my conviction. Could compassion survive under corporate scrutiny? By dawn, my inbox had become a battlefield. Subject lines blazed in urgent red. Liability assessment pending. Revised ROI model. Compliance revisions required. Each click pulled me deeper into the machinery of an empire that could grind compassion into dust if I wasn't careful. I sat at my bistro's back table, nursing lukewarm coffee, eyes scanning graphs and projections. Lawyers warned of lawsuits if privacy wasn't guarded. Analysts flagged budget shortfalls, urging me to cut premium ingredients. Advisors insisted on broader partnerships to maximize reach. Each demand tugged me in a different direction, and I felt myself stretched thin, as though the very soul of this initiative was being pulled apart. I shut the laptop for a moment, pressing my palm against the worn wood of the table. Basil still clung to my fingertips from last night's prep. It grounded me, reminding me that this was never about numbers. It was about faces, bowls, and stories. But how could I convince a corporation built on profit margins to see what I saw? By mid-morning, I launched 3 pop-ups across the city. Teachers, neighbors, and volunteers ladled soup as I juggled video calls with Ashton executives. On one screen, faces in suits asked for engagement metrics and feedback loops. On the other, a grandmother smiled as she accepted a cup of stew, whispering blessings. The contrast nearly broke me. But I stood firm, switching between spreadsheets and soup pots, determined to prove both worlds could coexist. Later, I gathered my small staff in the bistro. Their faces mirrored my own exhaustion, their voices tinged with fear. Will we lose hours? Will the free meals disappear? Is this just a show for investors? They asked. I poured them each a mug of coffee and steadied my voice. No, this is not theater. This is our mission. We'll balance both, the pop-ups and the cafe. Every bowl we serve proves to them what compassion can achieve. And I promise you, no one here loses their place. We're in this together. Their nods, hesitant at first, soon strengthened into resolve. Seeing their faith lit a fire in me. Whatever the cost, I couldn't let them down. That evening, the cafe bell jingled, and Henry himself stepped in. He wore no jacket, his sleeves rolled, his presence softer than I'd ever seen. The whispers among customers rippled, but he walked straight to the prep counter. You handle chaos better than most CEOs I know, he said with a smile. He picked up a ladle and offered me a bowl. Teach me that soup of yours. Let me get my hands dirty, I laughed, tension easing as I guided him through the steps. Heritage beans, thyme, tomatoes simmering into something both humble and miraculous. He tasted the broth, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Still magic." For a moment he wasn't a billionaire or a titan, just a man rediscovering the humanity he'd once lost. We shared a look across the steam rising between us. No words needed. His presence reminded me I wasn't alone in this fight. But as midnight approached, reality pressed back in. My laptop chimed with a notification. The final vote. I logged in, fingers trembling, as names appeared on the screen. Board members casting verdicts with a click. My proposal, my dream, everything we had built together, hung in the balance of anonymous numbers. Henry's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me, eyes intense. "Log in now," he said quietly. My chest tightened, breath shallow. The cursor blinked on the screen, taunting me. I could almost hear the verdict in its silence. Would they choose spreadsheets over soup? Profit over people? The kettle whistled on the stove, a sharp cry breaking the stillness. I stared at the steam rising from its spout and thought of every face I had fed, every story carried in a bowl. This wasn't just a vote. It was a trial of trust, of whether the world could believe that kindness could belong in a corporation's heart. At midnight, the final vote tallies flash on my screen. Heart-pounding, I hold my breath. The CEO texts, "Log in now." My future, our future, hinges on one blinking cursor. Will compassion prevail against the verdict of anonymity and ambition? They called it a gamble, investing in soul over spreadsheets. Yet the community's cheers proved profit can rise from purpose. I watched generosity bloom in the most unlikely boardroom. Dawn broke on the day of our first official community-funded pop-up. I arrived before the sun crested the skyline, heart pounding with equal parts fear and exhilaration. The street corner we had chosen, once a forgotten patch of cracked pavement, had transformed overnight. Folding tables stretched in a neat line, draped in white cloths. Steam curled from massive pots, carrying the familiar scent of garlic, basil, and roasted tomatoes into the chilled morning air. Volunteers bustled like bees, aprons tied hastily, voices cheerful despite the hour. My staff, once confined to the bistro's narrow kitchen, now moved among the tables with confidence. Ladles dipped, bowls filled, and laughter rippled across the crowd that had already begun to gather. Mothers with children tugging at their skirts, retirees leaning on canes, students clutching worn backpacks, all waited, not with impatience, but with hope. By mid-morning, the line snaked around the block. Each bowl passed forward carried more than soup. It carried dignity. I could see it in the way people straightened their shoulders after the first bite, in the way conversations blossomed between strangers as though they were family. For the first time in weeks, my fear loosened its grip. This was working. Cameras arrived before noon. A local news crew pushed through the crowd, microphones in hand. "May Turner," the reporter said, eyes bright. "What does today mean for you?" I looked at the faces gathered around us, bowls steaming in their hands. My throat tightened, but I forced my voice steady. "This isn't just food," I said. "It's proof that compassion can be scaled, that dignity can be part of business. Today shows that when we invest in people, everyone profits." The reporter nodded, but it was the faces beyond the lens that mattered to me. Children laughing with mouths full of bread. A weary father whispering thanks. A grandmother who pressed my hand and said, "You've given us more than soup. You've given us hope." As the day wore on, reinforcements arrived. Farmers donated crates of produce. Bakers dropped off bread, still warm from the oven. A principal marched up with a group of students, eager to serve as volunteers. My phone buzzed relentlessly with texts. Donors pledging support, nonprofits asking to join, neighbors offering venues for future events. It was as if the entire city had been waiting for this spark. And then Henry appeared, sleeves rolled, his crisp shirt stained with splashes of broth from serving alongside us. He looked at me across the tables, his smile brighter than any corporate victory could offer. He raised his voice over the hum of the crowd. "To everyone here," he said, "thank you for proving that when we feed the soul, The city thrives. The Ashton Foundation will match every dollar raised today, doubling our impact. Cheers erupted. Applause thundered down the block. I felt tears sting my eyes as I realized this was no longer an experiment. It was a movement. By evening, the last bowls were ladled, the last tables folded. Back at the bistro, the walls seemed to glow with new purpose. Photos from the day already adorned the bulletin board. Children grinning, volunteers laughing, lines stretching toward the horizon. My little kitchen had grown beyond its walls, into something alive, unstoppable. I sank onto a stool, exhaustion mingling with awe. That's when the knock came. A courier, coat damp from the drizzle, handed me a sealed envelope stamped with a crest I had never seen before. A lion's head encircled by fleur-de-lis. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside, on parchment so fine it felt unreal, were words written in elegant script. Her Majesty requests your presence at the royal palace. The room seemed to spin. My bistro, my soup, my humble recipes, they had reached farther than I ever dreamed possible. The note inside read, Her Majesty requests your presence at the royal palace. My hands trembled as I reread her words. From community kitchens to castles, could my recipe journey bridge both worlds? Outside, streetlights flickered as if urging me onward. What new chapter lies beyond the palace gates? A summons from the crown felt like both honor and trial. Palace guards in gleaming armor escorted me through marble halls. My apron felt worlds away from silken slippers and velvet ropes. Every step echoed with the weight of centuries and of my own uncertain destiny. The royal palace rose before me, like a dream carved from stone. Its gates, wrought in golden iron, shimmered in the morning light as though daring me to cross. The invitation trembled in my gloved hand, its wax seal unbroken until that moment when the courier had pressed it into my palm. Now, every step toward those towering doors felt heavier, as though I carried the voices of every soul who had ever eaten at my table. The guards opened the gates with a solemn nod, their polished breastplates catching the sunlight. Inside, marble staircases coiled upward, frescoes of battles and coronations sprawled across the ceilings. Servants moved silently through the halls, their slippers whispering on the stone floors, their trays glinting with silver and crystal. I followed the procession, my gown trailing behind me like a ribbon of midnight, my heart pounding louder than my footsteps. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax polish and roses. Tapestries hung on the walls, scenes of monarchs feasting, of kingdoms rising and falling. I thought of my own humble kitchen, of chipped bowls and worn aprons, and for a moment I felt impossibly small. Yet something steadied me. The memory of that first knock at midnight, when kindness had been exchanged in silence. At last, the chamberlain announced my arrival. The massive oak doors creaked open to reveal the audience hall. Sunlight streamed through towering windows, catching on chandeliers that glittered like frozen constellations. Courtiers in silks and jewels lined the walls, their eyes turning toward me as I stepped across the mosaic floor. Each gaze carried curiosity, some skepticism, and perhaps even envy. At the far end of the hall, upon a throne of gilded oak, sat Her Majesty. She rose as I approached, her gown flowing like a river of midnight silk, her crown delicate yet commanding. Her eyes, keen, kind, and searching, met mine, and in that instant, the room seemed to fade. "May Turner," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber without effort. "You have fed my people in their time of need, body and soul. For that, we thank you." I dropped to one knee, my hands trembling as they touched the cool stone. A lady-in-waiting brought forth a basin of perfumed water. My fingers were washed with lavender, a ritual of purification. I thought of the garlic and thyme that once stained those same hands, and tears stung my eyes. The queen gestured for me to rise. A herald unfurled a scroll, his voice ringing with solemn authority. By grace of the crown, and in recognition of her service to humanity may. Turner is hereby named Dame of Compassion. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The queen lifted a ceremonial dagger, its hilt adorned with sapphires. She touched my shoulders lightly. First right, then left. The ancient rite completed, she smiled. Arise, Dame May Turner. Let compassion be your sword, and kindness your shield. The hall erupted in applause, banners unfurling overhead, the sound crashing like waves against the marble walls. My chest swelled with emotion. I thought of the weary nurse at my cafe, of the artist who left his sketches, of the old man who knocked on my door that stormy night. Every one of them stood with me now, in spirit, in memory, in every dish I had ever served. As the applause softened, a chamberlain bent low and whispered into the queen's ear. Her expression shifted, curiosity sparking. She looked back at me, her gaze sharper now. The king's envoy arrives from distant lands, she said softly. Your mission, Dame may soon extend beyond our borders. My heart lurched. Beyond the palace, beyond the city, into lands unknown, kitchens unfamiliar, voices I had yet to hear. Could my recipes carry hope across oceans? Could kindness survive under foreign crowns? Her Majesty extended her hand, warm and steady. Join us tonight at the banquet, she said. There we shall speak not only of your honor, but of what comes next. I bowed my head, the weight of both fear and possibility pressing against my ribs. This journey had begun with a single bowl of soup, shared in the quiet of a midnight storm. Now it stretched into corridors of power I had never dreamed possible. She places a ceremonial dagger at my sash. Rise, Dame of Compassion. The chamber erupts in respectful applause. A whisper at her ear. Sire's envoy arrives from distant lands. My knighthood sparks a journey beyond familiar shores. Will mercy's flame guide me through regal courts and into the world's waiting hearths? I stand on my bistro's rooftop at dawn, the city skyline ablaze in pink and gold. Thousands now share my table, from boardrooms to burrows, all because I dared to serve kindness first. In that sunrise glow, I see how one act can ripple into a legacy. The morning air was cool as I stepped onto the roof of my bistro, the city sprawling before me in a tapestry of glass, brick, and endless possibility. Below, the square that once lay empty at dawn now pulsed with life. Pop-up kitchens unfolding like petals, volunteers tying aprons, families waiting in lines that curved around the block. The hum of voices, the laughter of children, the clatter of ladles. It was music that reached even here, carried on the wind. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. A year ago, I had stood here wondering if my bistro would survive another month. Now it had grown into something larger than I could have dreamed, a movement stretching beyond borders. Across the world, kitchens had sprung from our model. In South America, soup vans traveled to villages where markets had long disappeared. In Asia, schools opened cafeterias serving free meals to children, each bowl a promise of both nourishment and education. In Europe, culinary apprenticeships blossomed for young dreamers who had never touched a chef's knife before. Every photo, every message that arrived in my inbox was proof. Kindness had become contagious. Back inside the bistro, the walls told the story. Photographs covered the once bare bricks, smiling families clutching bowls, volunteers laughing, children lifting spoons high as if toasting the future. My staff bustled about with pride, each one transformed by this journey. Alex, once just a nervous barista, now trained others in leadership. Miriam, a single mother, managed an entire community kitchen with grace. Their victories were my greatest recipes. At breakfast, long tables stretched across the cafe, filled with faces I loved. My mother, her health restored, sat with a bowl in her hands, tears shimmering as she whispered, "We're proud of you." My brother, now a sous chef in one of the new kitchens, laughed as he passed bread baked by my father. Around us, friends, neighbors, and partners from every stage of the journey shared a feast named for milestones. First bowl stew, harvest salad, aprons bread. It wasn't just food, it was family, reborn. Later, Henry joined me before the crowd, both of us wearing aprons, his crisp and white, mine stained with basil and broth. Together, we announced the Global Blanket and Bowl Initiative, 100 new kitchens by year's end, each a place of dignity and nourishment. The room erupted in applause as a ribbon stretched across the courtyard and was cut. Balloons soared skyward, laughter spilling into the air as music filled the streets. And then, through the celebration, I saw him. The man who had started it all, the midnight guest, silver hair gleaming, eyes alive with quiet pride. He moved through the crowd with purpose, no longer a weary stranger, but a man renewed. When he reached me, he pressed something into my hand, a monogrammed cufflink, polished and shining once more. "May," he said softly, his voice carrying over the cheers. "This legacy is as much yours as it is mine. You turned a bowl of soup into a revolution. You gave the world back its heart." Tears blurred my vision as I embraced him. The crowd hushed, as though even they understood this moment belonged to something greater than celebration. It belonged to the circle of kindness completed. When we parted, he held out a small box wrapped in crimson ribbon. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside lay a key, silver, ornate, stamped with a crest I did not recognize. "For our next journey," he said with a smile that held both mystery and promise. I looked down at the key, its weight pressing into my palm, and felt the horizon shift again. From a midnight storm to global kitchens, from a simple bistro to royal halls, I had learned that kindness was never the end of the story. It was always the beginning. As the sun rose higher, gilding the city in gold, I lifted the key toward the light. Somewhere, beyond oceans and borders, a door was waiting, and I knew in my heart I would open it. He hands me a small box tied with crimson ribbon. "For our next journey." Inside lies a key stamped with a foreign crest, unknown yet resonant. Beyond kindness's shores lie new adventures waiting to be tasted. Our story continues. But where will this key lead us next? As the city skyline brightens, I feel destiny's door unlocking once more. Ready to taste more heartwarming stories and life-changing recipes? Smash that like button if May's journey moved you. Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new chapter of compassion and adventure. Drop a comment below. Which moment inspired you the most? And where do you think the royal key will lead next? Share this video with friends. Let's spread kindness far beyond our kitchens.